perilous and dangerous times, these are also the most exciting time to be around. I mean, think about that. How many generations have lived before us and have wanted to be raptured by God out of the earth? I mean, since the time of Enoch, people have been living, walking with God, waiting, anticipating, maybe this is the end. And even though we're living in times that are dangerous and difficult, we're also living in times, I believe, where a large number of folks will immediately disappear. My wife and I were talking about this yesterday as we were kind of going down to Charleston to visit my mom and just had some time in the car. The Bible says in 2 Thessalonians that strong delusion will be sent by God upon humanity, and they will believe a lie. And I come from a generation where we at least had some awareness of truth and some awareness of what was right and wrong. But we're looking at a society today who really doesn't care. Don't give me the facts. It's just what I think is right. And so two things have happened in my lifetime that have really caused me to pay attention more and more to Bible prophecy. One is when President Obama was elected President of the United States, never had we seen before in the world's history somebody rise to such superstar status in the short amount of time that President Obama did. Not only here in the United States, but around the world. I mean, just in a matter of months, this man was the talk of every nation around the world. So that was one thing. And then the second thing that really has caused me to think that we're living in the last days is this total disregard for truth today, where facts don't matter any at all. We'll throw words out, we'll throw terms out, we'll throw positions out. We'll argue, we'll debate, we'll even protest, and sometimes we don't even know what we're arguing and protesting about. There's this unawareness of truth. Those two things coupled together make me realize that a man could rise on the scene that the Bible calls the Antichrist. Rise to immediate starhood around the world, immediate popularity, and then the world receive him because they've been duped into believing a lie. And we're seeing that unfold around us. You're saying, what has that got to do with 2 Timothy chapter 3? Well, I hope you're there and you see the very first verse. Now, I am using this morning the King James Version because there's a couple of verses in this chapter that I think are better phrased in the King James than they are the New King James. So y'all just bear with me. This is my reading Bible. I love the King James Version. But in this particular chapter, there are a couple of points that I really want to emphasize that the King James translators did a fantastic job in the way that they worded it. And you'll notice the difference when we go through. But he says, "Know this also, that in the last days perilous times shall come." Perilous times shall come. That's our message this morning. The word perilous means dangerous or difficult or perplexed. And that is the environment that we're living in today. There seems to be this dangerous, difficult environment that we're living in today. And again, Jesus warned us that this should not come as a surprise because Jesus himself said, "When I come, will I find faith on the earth?" So for the next few minutes, what I want to share with you are basically 3 warnings, 3 applications out of this chapter that should cause us to really begin to pay attention to our own spiritual walk and the things that are going on around us. We are studying through the book of Revelation on Sunday night. And as we got to the church of Laodicea, we noticed very plainly that the Lord, instead of speaking to the church universally or the church generally, spoke to the individual. "If any man hear my voice, behold, I stand at the door and knock. And if any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and fellowship with him and he with me." That the church in the last days is going to be corrupt. There are going to be faithful followers of Jesus in the last days. And I hope you're in that number this morning. I hope you're in the number of a faithful follower of Jesus, that you're not just religious and part of a church. Because when Jesus comes, there are going to be two types of churches in the world. There's going to be a religious system that goes through the motions, and we'll talk about that in this chapter. People who deny the power of godliness in their lives. So there's a whole group of people that are going to be caught up in that. But there's another group, sort of like the days of Elijah. You know, when the 7,000 people had not bowed their knee to Baal. There are true, genuine believers that exist together with these that are Christians in name only. And I would dare to venture with you that this morning we go into a majority of our churches today around this country, that there are a lot of people in those churches who are Christian in name only, but have never really given their lives to Jesus. And so as we go through this chapter this morning, 3 warnings and applications that Paul will make. Remember, this is Paul's last letter. This is his advice to Timothy right before he dies. Paul knows that his death is imminent. He doesn't know that he'll make it through the next day. He, at this point, could anticipate at any time his death. So he writes Timothy this letter. And in this letter, he is encouraging Timothy as a pastor at the church in Ephesus, which Timothy stayed faithfully pastoring for the next 30 years. Paul was probably put to death around 64, 65 AD, somewhere around that, by Nero, the Roman emperor. John wrote the book of Revelation after about 90 AD. Timothy died in Ephesus trying to resist the crowd in their rebellion against God and was bludgeoned to death about 95 AD. And if you've read the book of Revelation, the very church that Timothy pastored in Ephesus was the first one mentioned by Jesus in the book of Revelation. The church that had become religious and lost their first love. And so we want to encourage you this morning, as Paul does Timothy, that we need to take a stand. So, number 1, if you're jotting these down, verses 1 through 9, the first application or warning, however you want to note this, is that we should expect difficult times. We should not be surprised by that. How many of us know believers, maybe we're one of them, that we're sort of like the office supply company. We want an easy button with our Christian walk. We want to hit an easy button, make everything just kind of work out smoothly in our life, and let's just live our life and go on to heaven. But we need to expect difficult times. He says, know this also, that in the last days perilous times will come. And as I said earlier, this is just one of many warnings that the Bible gives us about the difficulty of the last days. Jesus warned us about false prophets. Paul even looked at these Ephesian believers. The last time he met with them, he says, I know after my departure, you'll find this in the book of Acts, he says, I know after my departure that from within your own ranks will rise up those who will deceive the flock. And that was the warning that Paul gave to these Ephesian believers at a beach Bible study. And now he's writing to Timothy that these difficult times are going to come. And then what follows in verses 1 through 9 is a list of 19 traits that Paul said would be prominent in these difficult last days. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time with each of these 19, but we're going to go down the list because Paul does. And as we go down this list, it is easy for us to understand, because we're living it now, how some of these things are. It says, first of all, if you jot these 19 things down, men shall be lovers of their own selves. Lovers of their own selves. We live in a day today where self-love seems to be the top of the list. I was reading John Corson's commentary on this passage, and John Corson cited a study, a recent study when he wrote his commentary, that said that the results of a recent survey are in. Of the major industrialized countries of the West, the United States ranks number 9 in math and science. And we know that today. We follow the statistics of education in our culture today, and we know that many countries are exceeding our academics in their own countries. So John Corson says that we rank 9th in science and in math. But there's one area that we rank number 1 in the world of the industrialized nations. The students in America rank number 1 in self-esteem. I mean, we know we're doing a good job. We're just not doing a good job. You know, so in the last days, men will be lovers of themselves. They will be, and here the King James says, covetous. The New King James says, lovers of money. Ask any college student today what their goal in life is. You know what the majority of them are going to tell you? Make a lot of money. As if that's the chief aim in life. You know, that today we have become lovers of money. Not only lovers of money, but lovers of the stuff that money can buy. Tonight you'll get to hear Gail Irwin, and one of the things that Gail Irwin always says, and I love this, that we spend our entire life getting money so we can buy stuff. And then the time that we're not using to work to buy stuff, we're using to maintain the stuff that we've already bought. So we have become, in the words of a very popular secular song, very materialistic. We have become lovers of money in our culture today. So that's number 2 on the list. Now, like I said, I'm not going to go over all of these. Boasters, proud, blasphemers. Boasters and proud, just think of a peacock walking around strutting his feathers. You know, that's the way men are going to be. Blasphemers, the word actually means revilers. Disobedient to parents. We begin to see in the 60s the generations of the child. You know, where now the children think they can tell the parents how to live life. I remember one time when my kids were younger, I saw this plaque and I said, I'm going to get this and put it on one of the doors of the kids. It says, why don't you go out, now that you're 16, why don't you go out and get a job since you know everything? You know, and there's something about this generation that we live in that children are disobedient to their parents. Just go out and watch families and see how they interact with each other. And see how many of the children are controlling the family. Disobedient to parents. I was never disobedient to my parents growing up. I'm glad my family's not in this church right now. There's some that would probably disagree with that statement. But when I was disobedient to my parents, I was brought back in line rather quickly. I mean, we had problems when I was in school. But when I was in school, you've heard all the statistics. I mean, we got in trouble for chewing gum in class. And now kids get in trouble because they carry guns to class and rebellious to their teachers. I got my last paddling in high school in the 8th grade. How many 8th graders do you know get paddled by the football coach at school? Well, I did. And that was one of the worst, by the way. I couldn't sit down the rest of the day after that paddling. But that was just a different time. Disobedient to parents. And then we'll skip the next one because it's just not really appropriate to anything that we live in today, is it? unthankful. We have become a generation of moochers. We think everything, we deserve everything, we should get everything. And thankfulness, thanksgiving, thanking people is becoming a lost art. Unthankful, unholy. Now, verse 3 is one of the verses I said that I like the King James better. Your Bible might say the first characteristic or trait in verse 3 is something about lack of love. What does it say? Y'all talk to me. I'm going to make sure you're awake. What was that? Unloving. The King James says, without natural affection. Explains it a little bit better than just the term unloving. Without natural affection, you seem to lose that bond of relationship, that bond of love, that bond that keeps us together. There is no natural affection. And we got people killing their own family members now and doing things that are disgusting to their own family. I read things in the news this week that made my blood boil about families. I mean, where's this stuff coming from? And I think part of the problem in our culture today is we're exposed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to some kind of news media, feeding, and they run out of stuff to talk about, so we get all these other little stories. But it makes my blood boil when I see these atrocities that are done to children and to families, to each other, without any remorse at all, without any feeling of sorrow or anything. They'll go to court and they'll laugh as the judge begins to sentence them, as if nothing. There's no natural affection. Truce breakers is the next word here. The inability to get along with each other is what that word means. If you don't believe that's going on in our society today, then show up at Airport High School tomorrow night at 6 o'clock when President Trump comes to Columbia. And then come back and tell me if we get along with each other. Because I guarantee you, when President Trump comes into Columbia tomorrow, there's probably going to be as many people there protesting or doing something as there are people there that support. And I don't want to get into the politic part of it today. We had a discussion about this last night, and the problem I have with mixing our church with politics, I could come out today and say, I am a Democrat. And as soon as I say that, you know what I do? I alienate half the congregation. Or I can come over here and say, Democrats are crazy, I'm a Republican. And what have I done? I've alienated half my congregation. So it's best. You look at Jesus, look at Paul. They lived in oppressive political environments. The Roman Empire was not known for its gentleness, and it wasn't known for its acceptance of other people. And yet the Bible is silent about political involvement, except when Jesus said, render unto Caesar that which belongs to Caesar, and unto God that which belongs to God. This inability to get along. And if I'm not, chomping at the bits for some strange story about lack of natural affection, I'm also bawling about our inability to get along with each other. The way we just fight now. I mean, it is unnerving today the way we disagree. One of the reasons, I still have a Facebook account, but I haven't been on my Facebook probably in about a year. Because one of the things that fed me up to here on Facebook is everybody has an opinion. And they're quick to share it on Facebook. And they fight with each other and they get in these arguments and debates. I said, I've not got time for that kind of stuff. Because I got an opinion too, but as soon as I put it out there, I'm going to have 10 people writing me back about why I'm crazy and shouldn't be thinking that way. We just can't get along with each other. But the problem is we can't get along with each other in our families. We can't get along with each other in our work. I mean, you know what the number one cause of divorce is in America today? It used to be adultery or immorality. You know what the number one cause of divorce is in America today? We just can't get along with each other. We have irreconcilable differences. We are incompatible. Can I tell you a secret? Every one of us in this room have irreconcilable differences. Every one of us in this room are incompatible. Why? Because we're sinners. And we can't get along with each other because it's our nature. But truce breakers, false accusers. Get involved in politics and you'll see how quickly we're false accusers. I mean, the false stories just fly. I am so tired of hearing the term fake news. Because I believe all of it's fake. I don't care what news outlet you're watching, your conservative Fox News or your liberal CNN News, every one of them has their own agenda and their own spin. And you're hearing it. And I can't tell the difference between what's true and what's not true anymore. It's just the line has been marred. False accusers. Incontinent. That's what the next word is in our King James Version. I think the New King James says without self-control. Isn't it interesting, one of the leading products for my generation today, you know what it is? What's it called? Incontinence supplies. Am I speaking truth now? You can watch a commercial and get them delivered to your house so you can do it anonymously now. But it's a big marketing thing in our generation. Incontinence means without self-control. And we're living in a day where nobody seems to have any self-control. And you're saying, you're sure one to talk, Chuck. You're up there every week talking about your inability to turn away a Krispy Kreme donut. Well, life is a little bit more serious than not being able to deny a donut. But I tell you, when it comes to the matters of the heart and character, we have no self-control anymore. We want our way, we want it now. Doesn't matter who we hurt and how we get it. We want our way and we want it now. No self-control. No way. Nobody's biting their tongue anymore. They want to speak whatever's on their mind, whatever's on their heart. No thought about how it's going to affect anybody else. No self-control. I heard it said one time, our tongue is the only member of our body that comes with its own built-in cage. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. He told us to be quick to hear and slow to speak. And here we are, no self-control. We just blurt it out. We live the way we want to live. I don't care. And it gets back to this self-esteem. We're back to number one now. We're lovers of ourselves. I don't care what you think. Your opinion doesn't matter to me. What you want, what you need, what you care about is really insignificant to me. As long as I get to express my desire and get what I want, it doesn't matter about anything else. I mean, that's normal today. It should be abnormal, but it's normal today. It's in the church too. Because, we're small church here, and I thank God that y'all guys are here and you put up with me week after week up here. Now, it's such a blessing to me. Y'all come and I don't know if I'd sit down and listen to me all the time. But I appreciate you guys. But what the thing about the church is we have no self-control in the church either. Because I'll tell you, the number one reason I hear about people moving from one church to another. This is going to surprise you, but the number one thing I hear, and Pastor Mike will testify this is probably true, and Bill were here, he would do the same thing. The number one thing I hear about people hopping and moving from church to church to church, and I've heard it here a dozen times, is my needs aren't getting met. You're just not meeting my needs here. As if the church existed to meet your needs. The church exists to lift up Jesus Christ. And you need to get with the program and not worry so much about your needs getting met and see how you can meet somebody else's needs. What a novel idea. You know, that we get together to meet somebody else's needs rather than have our needs met. Now, don't misunderstand me. I know sometimes the church is a hospital, and we come in here and we've been wounded. And we need time to heal and time to restore. But folks, that don't take 30 years. I mean, 30 years from now, I still shouldn't be a wounded warrior, you know, just got my feelings hurt by some preacher somewhere, you know, and I'm not going to do anything or say anything or do, you know, no self-control. And God just pardon me about getting on my soapbox, but this is the generation we live in. And I'm trying to wrestle with how to deal with it. You know, I don't want to talk politics because it just turns into a fight. I want to get along with people, but people don't want to get along, you know, and all kind of things. Incontinent. And then this next word, fierce. Maybe your Bible says what, brutal there? Just the way we deal with each other now, it is this deep embedded anger. And never in my life did I think I would see a bunch of masked people at a protest trying to create some environment where trouble brews, you know, and fists fly, and those kind of things. You know, if you're going to protest, why don't you show your face? I mean, why do you have to hide behind some scarf, you know? We ought to be men and women enough to engage in the political debate without attacking somebody physically. I don't need to stand there and talk to you about my political opinion waving a baseball bat in my hand, do I? But that's the way we are now. We're brutal, we're fierce, we don't care. Look at the extent of crime today. I mean, I can't believe the atrocities that we as human beings commit against other human beings. There's this brutality, this fierceness that I've never experienced in my life. And we're numb to it. We don't care anymore. It's just, you know, it's just the way it is. And I started thinking about that. Why are we so fierce and brutal all the time? And I took a step back and look at our video games. Look at the movies we watch. Look at the television shows we are bombarding ourselves with. And if you really do believe the 10 Commandments, then why would any of us sit there and watch somebody kill somebody else when the Bible says, thou shalt not kill? Or why would we sit there and enjoy a show where somebody is in sexual immorality when the Bible prohibits it? I mean, you know, we have become numb to all this. So what does it take? It takes a greater shock level, you know, to keep our interest. You know, and I'm just talking about now, this is principle number one. We should expect all this. I mean, this should not come as a surprise to us. Now, here's where I like the King James, because the next one says in the King James, despisers of those that are good, which is a little different than what the New King James says, correct? Because the New King James says despisers of good. The King James says despisers of those who are good. Little slight difference there, but it changes the meaning a little bit of that verse. And today, if you try to stand up for something that's good and right, I mean, you're just shouted down. You know, they'll knock you around. In some cases, they'll physically abuse you. Just tell you to be quiet, shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. Despisers of those that are good. You know, and we're still only part way through this list. Traitors, heady, high-minded, conceited. That's what that word means. And here's the icing on the cake. Lovers of pleasure more than the lovers of God. I mean, we're all about having a good time. It doesn't matter. You know, I will go to any expense so that I can have a good time. But don't ask me to have any kind of self-sacrifice at all when it comes to the things of God. I'll sacrifice for my pleasure and my fun, but don't ask me to do anything that's going to cost me anything in my relationship with God, because pleasure is more important to me than God is. Lovers of pleasure more than the lovers of God. Always looking for that next high. Always looking for that next thing that's going to get my adrenaline going. Always looking for something that's fun. You know, and we come from a large family. And sometimes, you know, we're a little bit limited in the things that we can be involved in. And so we'll have these evenings where we'll say, we're just going to sit at home tonight. And you know what the number one reaction I get when I say we're going to sit at home tonight? We don't have anything planned. That's no fun. I mean, if life exists to have fun. You know, I told you earlier, you know, the number one cause of divorce between couples today is we can't get along with each other. We're incompatible. We have irreconcilable differences. But when I do marriage counseling before a couple just kind of gets a divorce, you know what the number one argument I have, I hear from couples when I talk with them? We're just not happy anymore. I mean, the sizzle has gone. And we're just going through the motions of existing. My wife and I just celebrated our 38th wedding anniversary last week. Amen. She's a wonderful lady. She's put up with me for 38 years. She deserves a crown. And, you know, there are times through our years, you know, that Angie and I have disagreed on things. Now, like Dennis Swanberg, we don't call them fights. We just call them disagreements. But we don't get to a place where we get, you know, that angry with each other. But I can't imagine life apart from Angela now. She has become such a part of me. Just the phrase of, I'm not happy anymore, is so foreign to me that I can't comprehend it, because life to me is not about fun. And I love what, I can't remember his name now. Just had a senior moment. I kissed dating goodbye. Josh Harris, what? Yeah, Joshua Harris. We were followers of his dad, not so much of him, because his dad was a big homeschooling guy. But when he was here in Columbia, Josh Harris, addressing a group of teenagers, this has been, what, 20 years ago? A long time ago. He looked at this crowd and says, God didn't call you to be happy. He called you to be holy. And that's always stuck with me. God didn't call you to be happy. He called you to be holy. And let me tell you another thing. Holiness leads to happiness. Look at the word blessed in the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed means, oh, how happy. You know, so here he says that they're lovers of pleasure more than the lovers of God. You see, the thing about pleasure is it never satisfies. It is never enough. We always want something more. Now, some of you folks in here like amusement parks. And I'm just an old timer, you know. Amusement parks have you know, they have really morphed over the years. When I was a kid, the biggest thrill you could get going to an amusement park was a roller coaster. I mean, an old rickety wooden roller coaster. Clickety, 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 clickety. And you go up and down and up and down. But, you know, now they got them going up and around, and you hang by your shoulders and your feet dangle. And I mean, you think about what it takes to create pleasure in us, and it's always going to the next level. I mean, bungee jumping is popular, but that's something I don't think I'd ever want to try. I got more faith in God than I do a rubber band. You know, I ain't going to jump off of something and trust a rubber band to keep me from hitting the ground. You know, but, you know, the lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, we always got to take it to the next level. We were talking about this last night. Justin, you know, Justin works with the Blowfish. If you hadn't had the opportunity, he's their radio voice of the Blowfish. 93.1, when the Blowfish have a game, you can hear Justin broadcasting the game. Well, we all went to the baseball game last night. And Justin and Leah worked it out, so we all got tickets to go to the Blowfish baseball game last night. And we really enjoyed it. I mean, Justin was telling me before the service this morning, it was almost a Norman baseball game last night. Because all the grandkids are out there doing all the stuff, you know, that they do at baseball games. Little Nat, you know, got to go out there at the beginning of the game and said, with a microphone to the crowd, let's play ball. And Jude got to go out there and chase the blowfish guy around the bases, you know, and it was a good time. But Angela and I were talking about that as we were coming home last night from that baseball game. That even baseball games have changed over the years. Because when I was a kid, we used to go to baseball games all the time. My dad would take me. We lived in Asheville. We'd go watch the Asheville Tourists play. And they still play. They play against the other Columbia team. And we would go to baseball games. And you know what the thrill was at those baseball games when I went? Taking your glove and catching a foul ball. But the game last night, and I know it was an exhibition game, so they had a lot of extra stuff in there, but between every change of inning, there was always some activity. And, and my wife said, this is almost like ADD baseball. I mean, there's something going on between every inning, you know, and you're going quickly from this thing to this thing to this thing. You know, you kind of lose track of, well, how many outs are there? You know, who's at bat? But yeah, lovers of pleasure more than the lovers of God. And think about that. You think about our own lives, how much of our life is spent with pleasure. I mean, we can't even sit through a church service hardly anymore without having some electronic device in our hands, you know, checking our emails, you know, and hopefully you're not playing a game, but, you know, getting involved in something else because we got to move on to the next thing. We got to get the next thing going. You know, lovers of pleasure more than the lovers of God. And I've got 5 minutes left, and I got 13 verses to go. Only principle number 1 here. We're lovers of pleasure more than the lovers of God. So how do you sum all that up? He says in verse 5, having a form of godliness but denying the power thereof. Folks, to me, this is a tragedy. This verse talks about people who will go to a church, who claim the name of Christ, who from all outward appearances are followers of Jesus, but they deny any power of that godliness to change their life. And I hate to say it, but I believe that's the majority of Christians in our country today. That we have a form of godliness, but we deny the power of that godliness to change our lives. We deny the power of God to conform us into the image of Jesus. We want nothing about that. And you probably are tired of hearing this, and my kids will always remind me, Dad, you say that a lot. In fact, you say it almost every week. But when I was growing, and I've been in the church since the time I was born. You know, my parents took me to church. And you know, we weren't necessarily a Christian family, but we were in church. That was just the thing that we did. And you know how many times a week we were in church when I was growing up? 3 times a week. Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. And guess what? When I went to church, they had no nursery either. So when it came time for the church service, we all sat in the church. And I was expected to sit still, I'll get my words right, for that entire service. And if I did not sit still for that service, then there was a consequence for that. Sometimes during the service, sometimes after the service. For me, it was usually both. But we sat during the service. And we went 3 times a week. And if there was another activity, we went to that. Now the norm in America today, by far across our country, the norm is 1 time a week. And if you go more than an hour, you're in trouble. Because David Hawking said, and I really agree with this statement, he says we have gone from tending sheep to herding cattle in our churches today. Get them in, move them out. Get them in, move them out. Got 3 services, got to clear the parking lot out, get the next crew in here, and that's the only time we're together all week. And we feel spiritual if we give God 2 hours a week. Lord, I gave you your 2. Leave me alone the rest of the week. I got my own thing going. That's why one of the reasons here at Calvary Chapel, and I know I'm old-fashioned, and I know I'm probably living 60 years in the past, but we do Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. We're going to have opportunity here for those that want to hear the word. We're going to be here. We're going to do that. Because I believe the Bible says as we see the day of Christ approaching, we should be gathering together more often instead of less often because of the very things we're seeing here. Because when I go out that door, do you think I'm going to run into people that are going to encourage me to live like a believer and to be a Christian and to walk with God? You think that's what I'm going to live with when I go out there? No, I'm meeting these kind of people. Having a form of godliness but denying the power, from such turn away. Dear old J. Vernon McGee, who's been with the Lord now for 30 years, would say, and I can still hear him say this, how in the world could you, if you are a born-again believer, go to a dead church? Get out, he said. The Bible says, from such turn away. And if you're going to a church that is dead, hopefully you don't walk out the door and say, well, I'm not coming back here. This place is dead. I'm going to find me a church that's alive. You know, but Paul says, from such turn away. And I'm going to have to wrap this up because, you know, the next principle we're going to talk about is follow the right example. You know, I need to anticipate these kind of days that I'm living in. So principle number 2 is I need to follow the right example. There's some people I just need to turn away from. I don't need to fellowship with them. I don't need to hang out with them because they are not encouraging me to live a Christian life. Doesn't mean I isolate myself from the world. I can't do that. But I can certainly choose who I hang out with the most. And one of the things I'm going to tell you, and you can jot this down, we'll talk about it next week as we get to this next session. Each of us should have 3 types of people in our life. All of us. We should have somebody above us, beside us, and below us. Somebody above us. Who speaks into your life? Who challenges you when you're not doing something that's biblical or right? Who has the authority to say something to you, you know, that you need to straighten up, man? Grab you by the shirt collar and shake you a couple of times and say, what you're doing is not right. All of us should have somebody in our life above us that can speak into our lives, and we're not going to slap them across the face when they do it. We give them the authority and the permission to speak into our lives. You need somebody like that in your life. I need somebody like that in my life. I need somebody that can speak to me plainly and say, Chuck, you're messing up. You're not treating your wife right. You're not treating your kids right. You're getting slack in your walk. We need somebody above us. Then we need somebody beside us. Friends, peers, that will encourage us to get it on with God. And we'll talk more about this next week. Much of what we call fellowship today has nothing to do with Christian. It might be fellowship, but it's not Christian. It's not encouraging us to be more Christ-like. So somebody above us, somebody beside us, and then somebody below us. That is, who are you speaking into? Who are you discipling? Who are you encouraging? And you can't do that unless you're first submitted to someone else that can speak into your life. Now, I'm not saying they run your checkbook and tell you when to do this and when to do that, but we need somebody that can speak into our lives. Disciple us so that we can get with our friends and we can worship Jesus. Now, I know I live in a bygone day and a bygone generation. Times were different. Things were easier, you know, when I was a young man. And maybe it was because when I was a young man, I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together in my pocket. I don't know. Because we'd get together and we'd say, what are we going to do tonight? Well, if it cost money, we weren't going to do it because we didn't have money to do it. You know, so what we did back in the day was when we got together, why don't we just worship the Lord? Why don't we just have a Bible study? Why don't we just go witnessing? Why don't we just pray? In my little apartment, where there were 7 of us living in that 3-bedroom apartment, that became the norm for us. You know, that when we got together, we're going to have a Bible study, we're going to have some worship, we're going to go out witnessing. You know, that was the kind of friends I needed in my life at that time. You know, somebody that would encourage me to get involved in things of God. instead of just, running to a movie or, going out and, having some kind of fun, because we're back to lovers of pleasure more than the lovers of God. So that little group expanded into a Bible study, which, by the way, is where my wife and I were first introduced. Because what we would do after the Bible study, we'd go out to a place called Perkins Pancake House down in Charleston. My wife was a student at Baptist College at that time. And so what did college students do? They came to Perkins because it was open all night, and they could sit there and drink coffee. Well, one of my roommates actually started talking to Angela and invited her to come to our little Bible study that we had on Tuesday night, because before we could shake a stick and really knew what was going on, God took that apartment of 7 where we just wanted to get together and have a Bible study and get together and worship. Before we could shake a stick, there were 70 people showing up at our apartment on Tuesday night. We had to move it out to the clubhouse because we didn't have any place to go. And she started coming, and of course it was love at first sight and quick engagement, and then 38 years later, here we are. But it was a different time then, where we wanted to have somebody around us that would encourage us, not the, what are we going to do tonight? When's the last time you got together with a group of your friends and you're all scratching your head and saying, what are we going to do tonight? And somebody stood up and said, well, let's go out and witness. Let's get together and have a Bible study. Let's get together and worship a little bit. I mean, we need people beside us that are going to encourage us to do that, because I have plenty of people that will encourage me to do the fun stuff. And then I get back up to that incontinence thing again, because I don't have any self-control when it's time to do fun. But you see where we're going. These should not be times that we are unaware of. We should be aware that these are the influences around us. And so the first warning was, know that they exist. That we can't just put our head in the sand and not expect them. Let me just give the other two. We'll come back next week and talk about these. Number 2, verses 10 through 12, is follow the right examples. And I want to talk to you a little bit about peer pressure and those kind of things. And then the third one, my favorite, is stay close to the Word. Verses 13 through 17. Kind of gives you an idea. If I know I'm living in difficult times, then this is what I need to do. I need to expect it. I need to follow the right example. And I need to stay close to the Word. And with those 3, we'll do it. Well, maybe you're here this morning and you find yourself mixed up in some of these 19 things that we talked about. And you find your heart far away from God. Well, God brought you to this place today so that you might get things right with Him. So we're going to have the part of the service now where we connect with God. We've heard His Word, and maybe God is speaking to us by His Spirit, and we're going to say, Lord, I want you to do your work in me. So why don't we stand? Why don't we pray? Why don't we ask the Lord to move?